After the battle against the Finger Bearer as well as the 2 death paintings were done, Kashimo, Nobara, Megumi, and Yuji all returned back to Tokyo High. With Kashimo now having a few things on his mind. After all, in that battle when he landed the Black Flash, he was able to get some memories back to something. He saw a vision of what looked like his future self. Wait, no, it wasn't his future self, it was a version of himself that used to exist. He was trying to figure out why he got that experience, who that person was, but some of those memories did remain in him. However, now they were just dormant. It was going to be a matter of trying to reawaken those memories, but he did remember feeling one thing. The amount of strength that he used to have in his past life was incredible. Sure, Kashimo was a super prodigy for his age. After all, he was on the level of a grade 1 sorcerer despite being a first year. But he felt the experience of his past self. He felt like there was something he was missing and he still had more room and improvement to grow. However, this time around things are going to be different, as there was one thing he did especially remember feeling, which was loneliness and isolation. Previously in his past life, he was isolated by his power, isolated by the amount of strength he had. But unlike that past lifetime, he actually had people he couldn't trample on and call dirt. He didn't have people that were so much weaker than him. Megumi, Yuji, as well as Nobara were all rivals to him. Gojo was the strongest, so he knew he wouldn't be the strongest of this era. While in his previous life he might have been alone, in this lifetime he wouldn't be, so he made a promise to himself. He was going to surpass that old man version of himself and he was going to get stronger in no time. But the first and most important step would be rememorizing all the power that his old self used to have and adding it to his new arsenal, which meant he was going to need to re-unlock those memories. Fortunately, since he had already done this in the past and his soul remembered it, it was almost like muscle memory, which meant it should be a lot easier to achieve. Which Kashimo did end up telling his comrades about this past memory they had, and they were all confused about it and didn't really know how to help with that. However, there was one person who did actually know what was going on, which was the person that was currently inside of Yuji, being Ryomen Sukuna. As Ryomen Sukuna was perplexed by this, after all, he knew reincarnation was possible for people. His twin brother managed to reincarnate in the past. But this kid was not like him. Sukuna had speculated in the past that the reason why his twin brother was able to reincarnate was because of Sukuna consuming him, but now with Kashimo existing, he wasn't actually sure why. And it's not like they were incarnated either, they were just a full-on reincarnation. So it wasn't like this was Kenjaku's doing, or else if Kenjaku could do this, he probably would have done this to more people. Though this made Sukuna even more intrigued and even more excited for when he would be able to fight all of them, especially considering this guy was a sorcerer from the past, which meant he might be from a harsher era, and if he's able to reattain that strength and surpass it, it will make him an interesting foe. Now of course Sukuna didn't say any of these thoughts out loud, but this is what he was thinking at the moment. As now Kashimo was beginning to train and experiment a lot more than he had ever done in the past, primarily because he wanted to be able to use his abilities to the fullest. He remembered in the past that he used to have a staff that he channeled lightning through, an additional way to make a lightning bolt that was much more powerful than his normal one that he could make through building up charges due to it building up electricity, this being his lightning rod. So Kashimo decided that he would make another one, however he wasn't going to just stop at one. He decided he was going to create 3 lightning rods, though one of them was going to be in a staff format and the other 2 were going to be similar to that of batons. Those lightning rods were more made to be set up in order for them to charge, while the main lightning rod that was staff was going to be used for Kashimo alongside in combat. Finally, he reattempted to learn reverse curse technique, but this was a lot harder said than done, because of the fact that he wasn't innately that good at reverse curse technique. He theorized that if he could learn reverse curse technique, he might be able to use his curse technique, because then he could heal his body as he was using it and not making himself die. However, unfortunately right now it was still a no-go. So while Kashimo was planning to try and revisit reverse curse technique later and keep those principles in mind, he was going to stick with training and figure out how to use his curse technique even better than he could now. But he was also figuring out new ways to use his curse energy trait. He figured that through research he might be able to figure out a new way to use his abilities that might be unique and be able to amplify him even further in combat. But that was going to be harder said than done. However, Kashimo wasn't the only one who was benefiting from him training much harder, as Kashimo still primarily trained with the other first years. After all, those were his comrades and the people he did actually like. Toto also did get some benefits too, since Kashimo really did like training with Toto as well. Now he wouldn't be able to always train with Toto, unlike Yuji, Nobara, and Megumi, since they went to the same school, in comparison to Toto and Kashimo who didn't go to the same school. Plus a lot of the Kyoto High students didn't like Kashimo being there, since Kashimo kinda beat up most of them. Kashimo does end up joining Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara's hangout when they go to the movies, as well as meeting with Ozawa. After all, he was interested and he figured that maybe if he saw how this would go down that he might be able to learn what his type was, or maybe he could even learn about the value of romantic relationships. He wasn't too sure, they still didn't seem to have too much value to him, but maybe seeing one happen live might actually be important. And Kashimo ended up being a little bit surprised at the fact that Yuji didn't take the chance. After all, from what he could tell, that this girl was perfectly his type. And the two of them knew each other, though at the same time Kashimo wasn't really one to judge. He wasn't going to question Yuji or pester him about it, as the reason that he thought of was the fact that Yuji was likely going to die in the future because of Sukuna Sukuna, so it more than likely made a lot of sense to not want to get with anyone. But that just seemed to be the cards that life ended up giving him. And he blamed for him when completely caught off guard because he was questioning why the hell was he even thinking about these things. It didn't really matter to him. So he ended up shaking off those thoughts and continue on with the rest of his day. Unfortunately, Mekamaru still ends up dying in this timeline, since there's not much going to change between the exchange between Mekamaru, Mahito, and Kenjaku, other than the fact that Kashimo is more likely going to join Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara in trying to arrest Mekamaru, but unfortunately he wouldn't be there. One day you're going to live Mekamaru one day. However, the other characters do end up benefiting from this as well, especially Yuji. Since Kashimo was interested in Yuji's Divergent Fist, he decided to try and influence Yuji and influence him to experiment more with the Divergent Fist, trying to make it so it can be his substitute for having a cursed technique, since Yuji doesn't have a cursed technique yet, and he was supposed to awaken Sukuna's eventually, but since he doesn't have that yet, he might as well focus on the one thing he does have that makes him special, Divergent Fist. Now, this will result in Megumi, Yuji, as well as Nobara all becoming quite a bit stronger than they were at this current point in time. Yuji and Megumi would be around the same levels as their coming games variations, with Nobara being pretty close to start of Shibuya Yuji. And finally, there is Kashimo, who while Kashimo isn't on par with his coming game self yet, he is making quite massive strides, with Kashimo definitely being the strongest among the 4 first years, and one of the strongest students at Jujutsu High. And with time passing, the group would have eventually arrived to Shibuya for the Shibuya incident. But up first, we need to figure out which squad the Kashimo is going to be placed onto. And the group that I see Kashimo more than likely joining up with is surprisingly going to be Nobara, Maki, as well as Naobito. And this is for one reason. That is because while Kashimo has gotten opportunities to fight alongside Megumi and fight alongside Yuji to see where both of their levels were, he's not really gotten the chance to fight alongside Nobara. Sure, yes, he's managed to spar against her and see where she is, but he wants to see what it would be like to fight alongside her. Which this does lead into Gojo getting sealed, as well as Yuji defeating the Grasshopper Curse, and Mei and Uiui having to battle against Kenjaku. Though Yuji does end up defeating the Grasshopper Curse even easier, due to him being in a stronger position. Furthermore, the battle against Yuji, Megumi, and Awasaka ends up going pretty similar to normal, and while they are a little bit more used to fighting alongside each other, they're not going to speed up how long it took for them to beat Awasaka. Furthermore, Osaka's an opponent where their power doesn't really matter that much, so yeah, it's going to end up taking a similar amount of time. Toji also ends up getting some in the same way too. However, things start to change when Nobara and Nita leave in order to go check on HD's location because Kashimo decides to go with them, which is when they do interact with Haruta. Now, for very obvious reasons that I don't even think I need to really go over, Nobara and Kashimo are absolutely going to destroy Haruta, and Haruta just barely able to escape thanks to his luck-based curse technique, getting a miracle that allowed him to live and for them to think that he was dead. This would then lead into Nanami joining up with the group and telling them that Gojo had been sealed and that their new objective was to free Gojo. However, now they were at a little bit of a crossroad. Considering somebody just tried to attack Nita, they were going to need to send somebody with them back in order to make sure that they would be okay, while the other two head back into the subway in order to give assistance. And Kashimo was debating on who to nominate, mainly because a part of him did want to fight alongside Nobara. He wanted to see what it would be like to fight alongside her, but at the same time he also knew Nobara was currently the second strongest here. Of course weaker than him, but they were slightly stronger than Nanami. That and having a ranged person like Nobara on their side would be rather helpful for getting Nita out, but at the same time there were benefits of having Nobara with them, which led him to ultimately deciding to nominate Nobara in order to go, who Nobara agreed with, though at the same time he did tell Nobara to hurry up with getting Nita out of here. So this would lead to Nanami and Kashimo heading into the subway in order to back up Maki and Naobito, as they all began to go deeper into the subway and saw what looked like a small squid-like creature. This squid was Dagon, the disaster curse of the ocean, as they immediately locked eyes onto Kashimo in particular, recognizing them as one of the people that Hanami had fought. Which that caused Kashimo to have some slight confusion, as he didn't know who this curse was before we asked the question, "Are you a friend of that tree person?" However, before they could respond, Naobito was quick to close distance and begin to beat on Dagon, slamming him hard into the ground. Kashimo blinked a little bit in surprise. He had to admit he was not expecting him to be that fast, but at the same time, he was impressed. He also noticed he was able to see Naobito's movements a slight bit better than Nanami and Maki could. As Kashimo then thought, so this is Naobito, the second fastest sorcerer right behind Satoru Gojo. Or at least known as the second fastest. I wonder if I'm faster than him or not. I'll figure that out later. As much as Kashimo was tempted to try and join into this combination of attacks, mainly because he was pretty certain that his lightning would be able to hit Dagon, he didn't feel like it. He wanted to size up Naobito first. They then suddenly saw Dagon throw up several skeletons all at once. Such a sight did cause everybody to step a little bit back, primarily because they weren't too sure what they were doing. As Naobito asked the question of how many people did they devour, and right before Dagon could begin saying their names, it was Kashimo's turn to close the distance, as he released a rapid barrage of punches on Dagon's body. While he was doing this, Kashimo also asked him the question of why are they letting a cursed spirit talk? It's a cursed spirit, they aren't going to get any information from it. But that ended up pushing Dagon over the line, as Dagon's body split in half before the real Dagon surfaced. As in a deeper voice, Dagon said, "All of you will pay for killing Hanami." Kashimo blinked as he said, "Oh, so that was that thing's name. Thanks for reminding me, I genuinely forgot." Though that confident smirk quickly faded away when he saw what Dagon was holding in his hand, a large ball of water that was being launched towards the ground. So in a very quick moment of thinking, Kashimo took out one of his batons and stabbed it into the ceiling, using it as a way to hang off of the ceiling. He knew if he was going to be in the water, he would be drained of his curse energy much faster. Kashimo was realizing that maybe pissing off this cursed spirit might have been a bad idea, because he did not realize until now that this thing was the absolute counter to him. As Kashimo was preparing to throw one of the batons he was carrying towards one of the other pillars, preparing to shock Dagon until he saw that Maki was still in the water, as well as Nanami. And he didn't want to kill two of his comrades, so he decided to not go with that plan. But he did see that Maki and Nanami were able to get out of there, so he was about to go through with this plan until Naobito drained all the water using his technique. Kashimo had to admit this was impressive. The amount of water this thing could produce was even greater than Maximum Elephant from Megami. Now as Naobito was explaining the different types of frames, Kashimo decided that he was going to go in for his own attack. After all, Dagon had left himself wide open and he felt like he was being underestimated right now. In one hand, Kashimo threw one of his batons to one of the other walls, keeping the one in the ceiling, as he let go of the one in the ceiling before sparks came off of his hand, and he threw the lightning bolt right through Dagon's gut. Dagon couldn't even process what had just happened, and the only one who was actually able to somewhat see the attack was Naobito. Meanwhile, Kashimo's two batons in the background were also charging up electricity as well, as Kashimo said that while Naobito might have the fastest curse technique, there's no way in hell he has the fastest attack. As Kashimo then rushed in towards Dagon with Nanami. Kashimo landing a punch on Dagon's back while at the same time Nanami landed a ratio blow on their back. Both of them had to acknowledge how resilient this cursed spirit was, as while Dagon was trying to heal away the wound that was now in his stomach since they did make a pretty big hole, he was still able to deal with those two blows. But Kashimo knew that if he built up enough damage on Dagon, then he would be able to fire even more lightning and finish him off. Kashimo's lightning was their best chance at figuring out how to take out Dagon. Furthermore, Dagon also felt the stun of Kashimo's electric curse energy. This allowed Maki to land her blow with her staff, and Naobito to follow up quickly by activating his curse technique on Dagon. As now Dagon was being comboed around, Naobito and Kashimo were their primary problems. A mix between Kashimo's stun as well as Naobito's speed made it very hard for him to be able to do anything. Whenever Dagon was about to attack, Kashimo stunned him, and whenever he wasn't being stunned, he was being trapped by one of the frames. It didn't help as well that Maki as well as Nanami were both there in order to add additional pressure to them. As Dagon then attempted to put his hands together, he was preparing to activate his domain expansion, something he felt he should have done from the very start, but he still had enough time. He still felt that he had enough time to win this. However, before Dagon could get that chance, two very powerful lightning bolts went through his arms as well as his stomach. Those being the baton from the ceiling as well as the baton on the wall. Under a normal circumstance, Kashimo would not have been as much on guard for someone to be able to activate their domain, but Dagon was the exception, purely because of the fact that Dagon wielded a domain expansion that would be around the counter to his curse technique. He knew if he allowed Dagon to use his domain expansion, he would be dead. So as a result of that, he was much more focused on killing Dagon than he would be normally, where normally he would be trying to enjoy the fight. This time he wanted Dagon dead. Unknowingly, this also allowed Kashimo to counter the creation of the sigil as well, preventing Dagon completely from making a domain expansion. However, the apex of pressure was achieved once Nobara and Megami both arrived in order to offer backup to everybody. And with the combination of all of them fighting against them at once, Dagon ultimately reached his end, being killed and eliminated by the group of 6 sorcerers, with little to no damage actually happening to them thanks to how fast they were, especially with Kashimo really wanting to make sure that Dagon was dead before he could even do anything. And Megami, funnily enough, also understood why, because of how much Kashimo really tried his best to make sure Max Elephant was always out of the picture. However, this did have an unintended side effect, as another person entered into the room. That person being Toji Fushiguro, though it wasn't truly him, it was more like he was a zombie, programmed in order to fight the strongest person around. However, this time around, another thought came to Toji and his programming, as he then decided he was going to fight all of them at once. While Naobito or Kashimo were the clear strongest here, the rest of them weren't weak by any means either. In fact, they were all pretty close to each other in terms of level, with Kashimo being at the strongest in terms of power, and Naobito being the strongest in terms of speed. So rather than his initial opening attack being him throwing Megami out the window, he decided to throw the wall at all of them in order to force all of them out the room and into the open. Though all of them were able to activate their curse energy reinforcement on time in order to reinforce their bodies, but they were all caught off guard. What the hell just caused that? They couldn't even sense it. That would require an insanely strong curse energy reinforcement, and yet there was nothing. Either someone was this good at being able to hide and cloak their curse energy that none of them could sense it while also releasing this amount of strength, or this person didn't use curse energy and was just that physically strong, which that might be possible too considering Yuji. And Jogo was about to enter into this battlefield as well, but considering what he had just seen in physical feats, he felt it might be best to let these two parties fight each other out, because no matter what, someone was going to be tired, and he would take out the person who lost after. Even though he was angered out of his mind considering what had just happened to Dagon, he wished he had gone here earlier, because maybe if he did, Dagon would still be alive, but that was just how fate was. though he was snapped out of those thoughts quite fast as he sensed another finger of Ryomen Sukuna being fed to Yuji Itadori, as he rushed over to Yuji Itadori's direction while Toji began to face off against his 5 opponents. As Nobito then said out loud, "Toji Zenin." Will the 5 sorcerers be able to defeat against the one freed from the chains of cursed energy? Find out next time on What If Kashimo Was Reborn in the Modern Era. Now up next, I do want to spend some time talking about the sponsor to the channel, Fan Dominion, an old friend of the channel that has a ton of cool anime merch, especially on the JJK side of things, but cool merch overall. And if you're looking for something that looks stylish, something that you can wear out in public and not be called a weeb for, but at the same time be recognized by your friends for wearing something really cool, they have good things in store for you. Or are you looking for something to complete your cosplay with? Well, Fan Dominion has you covered, and don't worry, they aren't expensive at all. And on top of that, if you use my code both in the description as well as on screen now, you can get a 10% discount. Yep, that's right, a 10% discount. However, now I'm going to spend some time showing off their beautiful catalog. And if you like any of this merch and any of this merch looks awesome to you, remember our code EF10 and you'll be able to get a 10% discount. Anyways, I'm going to see y'all later.